What was your final FU to a boss you didn't like? I was thinking about quitting but has holding back. I scheduled a vacation with 3 extra days. It was a once-in-a-lifetime type of trip. He rejected my vacation request. I thought about it for a couple of hours. Went to his office and told him I'm taking the trip no matter what. The next morning the boss met me at our and gave me a formal written warning. I responded by giving him my 2-week notice. They apologized and tried to convince me not to leave, but it was too late. Story 2. I work at a grocery store, and this is how I feel putting in time off 6 months in advance. I'm not asking to be off, I'm telling you I won't be here. Story 3. I ended up quitting one job because a boss wouldn't give me time off for a vacation that was planned 9 months in advance. He ended up blacklisting me and gave me horrible references, keeping me from getting any jobs for about a year afterward until I found out and called them out on it. That guy was a petty garbage human. Story 4. I booked a day off work like a month in advance, got approved. Then shortly after, I handed in my 2 weeks notice, so he scheduled me for the day I asked off. I tried to get others to cover, in which they were happy to, but he said nope, it has to be your shift. After finding multiple solutions he wasn't happy with, I said look, it's the last day of my last week, I'm not gonna be there that day. He replied okay, then updated the schedule and removed all of my remaining shifts. I was on a day off, but a coworker told me, so I came into work and we had a yelling match for an hour, before they escorted me out. Story 5. My boss and I had butted heads a few times after she took over the office. After finding a much better job I handed her a list of my job responsibilities, which she asked for, because she didn't understand what I did there. This is too much, we'd have to distribute all this to for different people, and I said yay, and walked out. Spoiler, she didn't do any of that and was fired less than a year later, as the office was falling apart. Story 6. That shit always pissed me off. I had a manager basically the same way. I was doing the work of 3+ people. I constantly said we needed relief. Juniors even to take the easier loads off or something. Nothing. Then I found I was being paid less than new hires with no experience after multiple years of this shit. So, one day, I got an offer for almost double my salary. Basically going from $65,000 to $130,000. We can't match that, so I left and chaos unfolded. They didn't realize I was playing the linchpin because about 6 months later I found out the team basically collapsed. My colleagues said fuck it and left from the extra work without help. They offshored the department who made it worse and they let them go and brought it back onshore. With people entirely untrained and no knowledge on our job. Which also had to balance against federal laws while doing it. Then there were layoffs and they were targeted because now it's a cost center. And my previous manager. Removed from the role and relegated to being basically a ticket jockey with absolutely no responsibilities. Senior leadership asked me to come back with 20% on top of the new salary to run things. That's a negative ghostwriter. You need to truly learn from this, and me coming back isn't going to teach that lesson. Story 7. My first professional job, I gave my 2 weeks notice. I had been busting my ass under the illusion that if I bust my ass I'll get recognized, better raises, etc. Rookie mistake. On the Thursday before my last day, I was asked by my boss to write up what I did. 4 pages later with another 4-page contact list of who my contacts were in and around the company that enabled me to get things done so quick. My boss just stared at me dumbfounded, then stammered on about how he didn't know I was responsible for all these things. Like, you're my boss, you assigned me half the stuff and I've told you about the other half. Then you had the audacity to not give me a raise and tell me I need to work harder after pulling 80-hour weeks routinely. Just shrugged. I had to turn and walk out because of the huge smile on my face. In the end they hired 3 people to take up the slack. Could have saved so much by giving me a raise and promotion. Story 8. I told one of my bosses that the reason I was leaving was because he mocked my desire to advance in front of my coworkers. His response to that was, well, I'm sorry if I did that. I've refused recruiters from there several times because I refuse to work on any team associated with him. Story 9. Oh man, the best part of that is you set off a shitstorm of office gossip because you didn't elaborate. I bet shit came up that no one knew about while people talked about it. I wonder what name did to make someone quit. I don't know, but sometimes I think he has a few drinks during lunch. Maybe that was it. Story 10. Mechanic at a commuter airline. Boss wanted me to sign off a plane pre-flight inspection. I refused to sign because the plane was not airworthy. He told me if I wished to continue working, then I'd better sign. My response: then I guess I don't work here anymore. I picked up my toolbox and left. Story 11. When I left, he promised to take half of what I was making and spread it among the team as raises to cover the extra work. He was trying to stop the exodus as I was the third person to leave in a short time. So when I left, I handed my pay stub minus social security info to the team and said, just in case he tried to lie, this is what I make. He tried to lie. They also realized they were being underpaid by a good chunk. He told me that was a breach of confidential information and they could sue me. I told him to sue me then. Never heard from that company again except for tax docs. For those unfamiliar, in the US you are legally allowed to disclose your own pay. And it's illegal for your employer to tell you that you can't. I'm assuming if he did try that, HR or the lawyers quickly corrected him before they had to hand me a settlement. Story 12. Did something similar with a consultant business I worked for. They weren't paying me travel and changing my place of residence to an apartment they owned in another city where the work was. This let them write off $5,000 more for housing for me, while costing me a $1,200 deduction for taxes on my paycheck. My tax return had my apartment I rented, and my pay stubs had the apartment the company rented. I told them to change it or I was calling the CRA. They refused, and I called the CRA. They had been doing the same thing for most of their seasonal workers for the past 20 years. The owners had to sell the business to pay off the tax evasion penalties. Story 13. Worked in China in a language training center. Left the country without informing anyone at work. Once I was out of China, I posted all the info I had about the benefits foreign workers were supposed to have but never had: tax reimbursement, pension savings, etc., and how HR and FINANC appropriated them in regional and local WeChat groups both in English and Chinese. Also posted addresses of local government offices where foreign workers could inquire about the aforementioned benefits or complain about lack thereof. A guy I used to work with spent a stint in China teaching English. When he tried to leave, his employers implied they would report him to the communist government as some kind of spy. He waited until his next paycheck, bought a plane ticket with cash and ran. Story 14. Salary was delayed by 2 weeks and was about told to be lenient because the company is growing and needs our help and cooperation. I waited for another week but I was ignored. I left the job without notice, and upon them calling me to sue me, I replied, you have money to sue people but no money to pay employees. I switched job and I am at a better place right now. Story 15. On my last day at the bowling alley, I sent an email to head office detailing all the shit he'd been up to, but everyone was too afraid to report Inc. Trying to fire someone when he found out she was pregnant, a big no-no in my country. I heard later that the next day regional manager and a couple of executives turned up for a surprise inspection. He's found in the office, having backed a 16-year-old female colleague in the corner, screaming at the top of his lungs, with his big red vein-throbbing face touching hers. She was distraught and obviously crying her eyes out. Manager was escorted off premises there and then and never heard from again. Story 16. I was a program director developing and piloting a new program, and after a year of being overloaded and telling our exec director I either needed a second person or a smaller caseload, he pulls me into his office and goes, "We don't really think you're a good fit for this position, but you're a bright young lady and we'd hate to lose you. I'm giving you the option to stay and be my secretary. You have until 7 a.m. tomorrow to decide." I took an early lunch, walked to my other job, asked if I could take on more hours, walked back, and told him I had found other employment and would have my stuff cleared out by noon. He asked if I could stay 2 more weeks to train a new person, and I told him no. What if we paid you a consultation fee? No. But you're the only person in the county certified. Should have thought of that earlier. Story 17. We currently don't have an exec director because ours quit in November. I'm the only director on staff. Our board is actually an executive committee because we are a collaborative. So our board is actually CEOs and EDs of select collaborative members. I've been holding down the fort while being the only staff person working remote across the country, applying for RFPs and grants, which is not my job. Basically doing 3 full-time positions because we have lost staff and exec committee won't rehire anyone. The other day they had the audacity to question if I could really manage staff remotely, as if I haven't been doing that this entire time, saying I need to get their approval before allowing staff to take PTO. I was as polite as I could be when I delicately implied they have plenty of other things they should be more concerned about. I will go on maternity leave in May, and I don't plan to return. Story 18. I once worked for a young company for only 6 weeks, during which time I implemented an entire CRM system, as well as doing lots of other work, including lining up sales with several new clients. At the end of the 6 weeks, the owner abruptly fired me because she said the CRM system was unnecessary and I had wasted too much time on it instead of just bringing in sales. She had approved the CRM project, and it was clear she was only firing me because she realized she couldn't pay my salary. After a week or two, they must have realized all the other work I'd done, including all the information about the sales I'd lined up, were locked on the company laptop I'd been given. They never bothered to install company software on there and couldn't access any of my work without my password. Multiple people desperately emailed me for the password, and I never responded. The irony, of course, being that if I had been at the company just a couple more days, all that work would have been transferred to that CRM system, and the entire company would have been able to access all of it and not lose the sales. Story 19. I quit. They begged, so I agreed to stay while they hired someone for me to train up. I figured it might be a month or two. The local talent pool was not a deep one. Months pass, no interviewees, and I asked coworkers if they'd seen people being interviewed for my spot, and it turns out no one was being interviewed for it. I don't know what possessed management to disregard the gift I had offered, but long story short, I quit that Friday with no further warning, sent the email at end of day, and I guarantee that ruined several people's weekends, probably right up to the CIO level, since he was the one who convinced me to stay on while they hired a replacement. Scroll forward a year, and they had hired 3 people to try to keep up with the workload I was managing. We're still falling behind with lower quality work. Various departments were pissed at management, and the coworkers I knew from the place had been told by management to ask me if I'd come back if they ran into me in town. A few folks did run into me, obviously, which is how I found all that out. We had a good laugh. Story 19. I was paid $40,000 for the work I was putting in. Then they let me go as part of a cost-cutting measure. Other employees tried to pick up my work, but they couldn't because they were already busy with their work. The company was forced to hire 2 people to do the work I was doing, and those 2 people's combined salaries ended up being around $80,000. Story 20. Working retail. I quit at the register on Black Friday. I had recently gotten another full-time job and was keeping this retail gig because I liked the employee discount, and due to my other job this check was pure fun money. All that is to say, I didn't need the retail job. My store manager comes over at hour 7 of my shift, with chaos and a line 100 people long, and has the nerve to tell me my upsales fishing for promo signups, i.e. rewards, credit cards, etc. weren't cutting it for how much traffic I was seeing in front of the customers. I already couldn't stand this beast, so I said, "You know what, you do it, I'm done," and then I apologized to my coworkers on the way out. Story 21. I'm a commercial construction superintendent. I couldn't get the support needed from our PMs and had been thrown under the bus for several deficiencies that I had pointed out early in the project, all of which were ignored. My 30 years of experience meant nothing against their 3 to 5 years in the industry. I was tasked with developing a safety program that was never enforced or followed, as well. 3 sites were nailed by OSHA. I got the blame for that as well. One evening, on a whim, I restored my laptop, tablet, and phone to factory settings. The next morning I removed all of my belongings from the site trailer. I then locked it up, sent them a goodbye and if you very much message, and tossed the keys into a retention pond. I got a call 4 hours later from the company I now work for, and 8 days later I had moved to a new state for twice the salary and a lot less stress. Story 22. My mom was in the final stages of cancer and wanted to be around my parents as much as possible. Tried to ask for leave by FMLA, the sheriff and chief basically said that's life and declined the leave plan. I quit and found another job and was able to have a good final 6 months with her before she passed. Story 23. This was my senior year of high school. I worked at IHOP and my direct supervisor was leaving, so the GM was going to take over my schedule. Well, he didn't like me or my two friends who worked there as well. So when he posted the new schedule and drastically cut our hours, all three of us walked out and quit. He still had to fill like 4 or 5 weekday shifts and cover all of our weekend hours because all of us worked both Saturday and Sunday morning rush. Story 24. I forgot my name tag at my second or third day at work at a supermarket. The manager, Damien, asked me where the name tag was, and I was honest, I forgot it. He says to me, "How about I forget to pay you?" I wanted to tell him off but needed the job. It was casual hours, but they started giving me more and more when they saw how efficient I was. I had a few runs-ins with the guy over a couple months. He was one of those short guys that had a complex about it. Drove a powerful car, belittled people, and was just a piece of crap. Eventually I found full-time work, so one day I walked in, resigned on the spot, and walked out. But it was a weekend, and he wasn't there. It was right before Christmas. For some reason that night I get a call from the store asking me to come in to cover a shift the next morning, and I mentioned I had quit. They had no one else to do it, and said why not one last shift. I said no and hung up. About 5 minutes later I got a call from Damien asking me to do the coverage. I repeated to him that I had quit, and he repeated that he needed the coverage and he'd see me in the morning. I said frick you and hung up. He called me back and said that I can't say that and HR will be having a word with me, so I said frick off shorty and blocked his number. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and watch another one of our videos on screen.